Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pushing It. It's a new series, or it might be a series, I don't really know yet, where I'm going to go over the APUSH textbook chapters in this book right here, Give Me Liberty by Eric Foner. So AP class, AP US history. Today we're going over chapter 5. Don't ask me where chapter 1, 2, 3, or 4 is, because generally I have no idea. Okay, but this is for last minute studying. I don't even know if I'm going to do this again. I don't know if this video is going to get uploaded, but we'll see. Alright, so first of all, we're going to start out with the regulations that were going to be needed in the colonies in order for British strength and prosperity. That's what they wanted, right? So these restrictions, so they put these restrictions and taxes on everything. So then examples of these can be the Wool Act of 1699, the Hat Act of 1732, and the Iron Act of 1750, which is just forbade the manufacturing of all these items. So this leads to the Molasses Act of 1733, which restricted trade between New England and the French Caribbean for, obviously, molasses. But it didn't restrict it completely. It only added a huge tax on the French molasses used to make the rum in New England, as rum was a huge source of income for them. But obviously, if you read chapter 3 and 4, you know smuggling was a huge issue, and this did not solve it at all. It was regularly broken by the colonists as they just kept smuggling. And to add on to that, there is the Navigation Act, still intact, which if you just go back to chapter 3, you'll learn all about it. But in the colonial life, the British government, they didn't really care about the internal affairs there. They didn't really care for the tobacco planters and Puritans. Like, they weren't going to cause an uprising. No, they didn't care about how they felt. They had no clue what was going on there. We proved them wrong, though. But really, these views and these taxes and restrictions all came from the 7-Year War, because it cost British so much money that they needed to make money somehow. And their result for that was to put taxes onto the colonies. This is 1, help pay for the war. 2, make the British rule more effective. And 3, the politics in almost all the states supported it, as nearly all British political leaders started that supported the new laws. So mostly all of them just supported it, but this outraged the colonists. Now the British people, they believed the Parliament represented the entire empire. Since the Civil War and the uprising in Britain, the king didn't really have that much power. Not anymore. But Parliament, since they won, they deserve to legislate millions, right? Now, Americans, the problem was they were given so little voice, if not a voice at all, in Parliament. Now we go over to writs of assistance. Now, this was supposed to combat smuggling in America. They were general search warrants, so they could search you for any smuggled goods. This could be anywhere for officials, or if you're less than that, you have to have more specific, but officials could do anything. Now, in the book, on page 180, I think this is 6 in my notebook here, James Otis says it was the destruction of British liberty. This was right. So now you have the Proclamation of 1763. This basically just moved the Indians further west in the Appalachians, as more settlers just kept moving out because there's so many people just coming in. But now we get to the good stuff. Now we get to the Sugar Act of 1764. Okay. It was introduced by Prime Minister George Grenville, and really, I'm going to read this and you're going to think it was good, but it was not. It reduced the tax on imported molasses by 50%. It's pretty good. And it tried to also put an end to smuggling, as if you were caught smuggling, smugglers were given a trial without jury. This really messed up Americans, as the Navigation Act was already in place, and dude, you could only sell with Britain. You could only export your items to the British colonies. No one wanted to do that, right? Because they knew that they had no other options, so you could just lowball, which isn't good. Then we get to the Revenue Act. Now, it's a small act, doesn't really do that much, but certain common goods traded with other countries, they were now on the enumerated list, which, if you could already tell, is not good, as it threatened the politics of the colonial merchants. Sorry, the profits, not politics, as they could only trade with Britain now. Another example of mercantilism, the huge idea in Chapter 3. Now, you get to one of the biggest points in the whole chapter, which is the Stamp Act of 1765, right? Now, the goal of this was to help finance operations in England, like I said, after the war, which caused so much stuff. This is a little piece of propaganda by the colonists, where they dumped tea in the mouth of a loyalist who was tarred and feathered. I don't really want to get into that. But, like I said earlier, it was Parliament trying to raise money directly from taxes. And this tax was on all printed goods, as they must carry a stamp purchased from authorities. This is books, newspaper, almanacs, calendars, etc. Now, this affected everyone, as education was becoming more and more common in the colonies. But it mostly affected readers, writers, and printers the most, obviously. But this was established without colonial consent, because I'm sure no one in the colonies would ever want this, which challenged local authority, and everyone was ready to defend themselves on a verbal and political scale, not like violent, like war, like shooting people. But there were some people that agreed with it to help, like obviously loyalists. While they don't like being taxed, they did help it, or they did support it, such as the governor of Massachusetts. Surprisingly, he did approve of Parliament's doings. But America, as a people, they believed that they should be untaxed, as they had no representation in the House of Commons, which you should know about, since that was in the previous chapter. It's one of the parts of Parliament out in London. Now, the Stamp Act Congress, which was established in October of 1765, it was 27 delegates from 9 colonies, and it was started by affirming to the crown and being subordinate to Parliament. Therefore, meaning that they were going to control the Stamp Act. Basically, what they did was taxes were consented, and taxes pretty much equal true freedom, which is just BS in my opinion. So how did the colonists respond? So merchants, they boycotted British goods. They did that until the Stamp Act was repealed in later on. See, do I have it here? Yeah, 1766, just a year. Stamp Act only was in act for a year. But in this whole Stamp Act of 1765, Parliament actually united America in hatred for Britain, in a way. More on that later. So, the Community of Correspondence, this also was a huge example of the United Colonies. It's in Boston, and they contacted the other colonies to fight against the Sugar and the Stamp Acts and the Currency Acts. All of these, they're like, yo, we gotta stop. We can't do this. All they do is just pressure us, and it's just like they're taxing us. They're barely even paying tax in Britain. Like, why is it us? Who knows? And people of the lower tiers in society in the backcountry, they started caring about their liberty a lot more. And I mean a lot more. So this brings us to the Sons of Liberty, which was established in New York. This took the lead in the boycott, this organization. And the men leading it were the wealthiest elite. They were pretty much getting hurt the most because their profits were dropping. Now, there are obviously revolts against the Stamp Act. This usually resulted in violence, as it was a revolt, and burned houses of officials and loyalists and everyone British. But in 1766, Parliament repealed the Stamp Act, like I said earlier. But kind of in place with it, well, not really in place, but they did follow it up with the Declaratory Act, which rejected the idea of only elected people could levy taxes, which, as you can assume, led to further conflict, as it didn't really solve anything, but it did help the American people a lot. But in summary of the Stamp Act, it drove people away from Britain and more towards each other as colonies. And we're starting to see kind of America form one big colony here instead of just separate states. Now, there's more westward movement, obviously, moving the Indians out, which obviously led to more conflicts. Not a lot about Indians in this chapter, I can't lie. Or really at all. There's like one part, which we'll get to, but not that important. Now, there are regulators. And these people, this was wealthy men in South Carolina. So we're moving to the South now. So they protested on the representation of Western settlements in colonial assemblies. So they're like kind of the backcountry. And they want to be represented in the colonial assemblies because they were all focused on the cities and the big local hubs, the huge places where most of the people were. But there was still a lot of people in the backcountry in these states. So they wanted representation. Now, North Carolina, we're moving up north a little bit to North Carolina. There's small farmers there, refused to pay taxes. Mostly kidnapped officials, which, wasn't really that good. But going back to the regulators a little bit, they threatened these high prosperity of ordinary settlers. Like, no one wanted to go to South Carolina because of these guys. Like, high taxes, in court fees were implemented there, and it's just like no one wants to go there when you could go to any other state. This also led to the Battle of the Alamance in 1771. Not that important. Basically, farmers were oppressed by the militia. Not much on it in the textbook. Okay. Here you go. No, another big part. The Townshend crisis. And you guessed it, it's another tax. So Parliament put a new tax on imported items to replace the Stamp Act. It's just more taxes. And they added these custom commissioners, not like custom as in like you gotta customly make your Chipotle bowl or burrito, whatever you get there. It's more of a custom as in like an airport. Like you have to go through customs to get to another country. They're trying to collect the taxes and suppress smuggling, because smuggling is still a huge problem in America. They use this money to pay American governors appointed by the king and judges. But as a result to this, many merchants objected this, obviously, as they just had to pay more tax. I feel bad for the merchants, because all they were doing in this time period was just saying more and more taxes, and they're just trying to make a living. You have to feel bad for them. And in 1768, just a year after this was established, as you can see here, 67. The British import ban was reimposed in the colonies. Now, this was the boycott of British goods. Okay, there you go. This was a symbol of American resistance. It was the virtuous spirit of self-sacrifice that the colonies and the patriots were trying to symbolize versus self-indulgence and luxury of British goods and the loyalists and how they always want to support Britain when they shouldn't, when they need to form a whole new country. Now, then we get to the Daughters of Liberty, right? This is a woman who spun or wove at home and basically produced their own clothes for the men and for themselves. They were considered self-sacrificing their luxuries in order to help the boycott. In Virginia, I found this surprising. They temporarily banned the importation of slaves. Now we're talking about Virginia here, it's a huge slave colony, right behind South Carolina and North Carolina, and Georgia. Well, not really behind. I think they'd be right up there with them. But, the government did it, but the small Piedmont farmers ignored this, the farmers inland. And protests broke out for this boycott, as you can see in this image here. But small artisans, they loved it because they were kind of just benefiting from it, as the Americans were now relying on locally made goods that they had. Now we got first real act of violence here. I know we had the Alamance, but who really gives a shit? No, the Boston Massacre was March 5th, 1770, and it was snowball throwing Bosnians versus Redcoats. As you hear, Bosnians on the left, Redcoats on the right. Obviously, they had the guns and the firepower the Bosnians didn't have. Now, they're throwing snowballs at them, but obviously they had ice and rocks in them, and escalated into an armed confrontation, leaving 5 Bosnians dead, one of them being Crispus Attucks, who was the first martyr of the American Revolution. That's what he's referred to as. Now, there's 9 Redcoats in this. 7 found non-guilty, and 2 found guilty, which is kind of surprising me. But, it really shows how fair the American courts were, even the British, killing their own people. It was kind of ridiculous. But also in 1770, the boycott ended, as America was like, yeah, we kind of need the British goods, which, 1770, it wasn't really a good year for them. And all these economic values of everything just returned to normal with this boycott ending. Now, there's one little person I want to talk about quickly. John Wilkes, not John Wilkes Booth, the guy who assassinated Abraham Lincoln. John Wilkes. He's a radical journalist in London who got a seat in Parliament, but he was rejected from it because he conflicted the views of the king and everyone else in Parliament, as he supported the colonies. Everyone hated him. I liked him because he's a radical journalist. I don't know. But moving on. The Boston Tea Party. We're not there just yet. We need to talk about the build-up first. So we need to go all the way to India, to the East India Company. So the East India Company, they had a monopoly on trade in India. Tons of investors from England dumping their money into it. Dumping all of their money into it. Because it was so successful. Now remember, India is a colony of England. But it crashed. It crashed. Lost so much money. It was bad. Bad. Okay. Now, they did have tea, though. England gave them tea. And let's just say tea was drunk by all. There's no more wealthy people just drinking it. It was drunk by everyone at this point. Now, England, they offered rebates and tax exemptions to continue to save the East India Company. Are you kidding me? They're screwing over everyone to save this one company. So now they dumped this low-priced tea into the colonies, undercutting local merchants and screwing everyone over, like typical English fashion. But not only this, but it also threatened Assembly's control on colonial finances, as colonial people started to buy more of English goods, such as the tea. Now, this was counteracted by the Boston Tea Party. This happened on December 16th of 1773. A bunch of colonists dressed as Indians board a ship, dumped the tea into the sea, over 300 crates, which in nowadays costs over $4 million. It's quite a lot. But in response to this, Parliament was not going to let this slide. We should have known that. The Intolerance Act. Sorry. So they closed Boston Port, and they made Bosnians pay it off. Until it was paid off, they would open it up again. But they also allowed military commanders to lodge in homes. The Third Amendment, kind of why it happened. Because people are like, no, I don't want just redcoats in my house. No one wants that. But this united colonies again in opposition, because everyone hates Britain now. This is a direct threat to the political freedom of America. Moving on to the Quebec Act. This was in 1774. It extended the southern border of Canada into the Ohio River Valley, which colonists feared were going to strengthen Catholicism due to the legal toleration of Roman Catholics in Canada. Remember, England is Anglican and Protestant, which means the questioned land claims in Ohio as, kind of those already territories already for the U.S. Not really sure why these guys are just getting the land free. But there's Sons of Freedom that came of this, who resisted every attempt to take away their liberty, like literally every attempt, and they believed that the British were instigated by the devil, which also rose to the Catholicism that they were allowing in Canada. Now we go to Suffolk Resolve. Not Suffolk College, it's Suffolk Resolves. Now this was kind of a letter to everyone that they would refuse the obedience of these new laws that the British are creating in Massachusetts. They would withhold their taxes, and they told everyone to prepare for war. This is the first glimpses of the American Revolution happening. God. Here we are. The Continental Congress. This image maybe? This image is pretty popular, so you should know it. Met in Philly and brought a lot of prominent political leaders together. 12 out of 13 colonies came. Georgia, not sure why they didn't come, but they just didn't because they're bitches. Massachusetts brought people like John and Sam Adams. Virginia brought some delegates, such as Washington and Patrick Henry. And Patrick Henry does have two famous quotes. One of them being, "I am not a Virginian, but an American, and give me liberty or give me death." One of the famous quotes probably ever, or at least in American history. But they also created the Continental Association, which halted trade with Great Britain and the West Indies, except for the exporting of rice to England, which was insisted by South Carolina. So they still have at least a little bit of a revenue getter. This encouraged domestic manufacturing, and they called out enemies of American liberty, who were merchants trying to make a profit off of the lack of resources since they stopped trade with Britain. So then these views of American politics inside America changed they stopped really resembling Britain and came more on natural rights and universal freedoms that they believed were right, not the typical historical rights of Englishmen. John Locke, also the GOAT, he was very prevalent. His natural rights laws or theory was incredible. It's so influential throughout this entire chapter. Now, Battle of Concord and Lexington, okay? April 19th, 1775. This is nearby Boston, as we can see right here. So, the Redcoats were seeking the stockpile of weapons in Concord, and Paul Revere got word of this. He's like, "All right, I'm out of here." Runs. The British are coming. The British are coming. So these militiamen in these towns prepare to defend themselves. Skirmish happened, and the British won, unfortunately. Wait, did they win? Hold on, I might be tripping right now. I think I am. I think I did. Who won? Yeah, it was an American victory. As the British did retreat to Boston, have my too. I'm sorry. 49 Americans dead, 73 British dead. This was also called the shot heard around the world, the first shot of the war. No one knew who shot it, and it started the Revolutionary War. This falls up into Fort Ticonderoga, up in New York. This was May of 1775. So General Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys and the Connecticut militia, they surrounded the forts, which forced British to surrender. Now, Washington's commander, Henry Knox, ordered the cannons from here. You can see, like, right here and here and here, were to be moved to side Boston to help in the Battle of Bunker Hill. Unfortunately, we lost it, which was June 17th, 1775, 2 months after Lexington and Concord. This was really at Breed's Hill, actually, but who cares? Heavy casualties on both sides. The cannons from Fort Ticonderoga forced British out of Boston, though. But unfortunately, they cut down the Liberty Tree, which, if we go back to that Tea Act propaganda, we can see there was a noose on it, if you guys remember that. But they cut it down, unfortunately. Now we get to Big Boy Washington, appointed the head commander of the army, and he was the best known military commander as he had experience in the 7-Year War. He was a prominent Virginian, and he would reunite the colonies. Now, what was his response to appointing Washington head commander of the army? England declared America was a state of rebellion and closed all colonial ports. Now, they were about to head to war, America. Massachusetts and Virginia, they're like, yes, sir, we got to do it. Because they're the strongest colonies. They hated them. Because so much happened in Massachusetts, especially Boston, because that was the main place of the revolution so far. Especially the Intolerable Act that's burnt them out. New York and Pennsylvania, though, they're a bit iffy. As a very diverse group of people there, as you can learn from the other chapters. Now we got this guy, Joseph Galloway. He was a Pennsylvania leader and delegate. He was in the Second Continental Congress, and he believed that conflict internally in America will come with independence. What this means, like, what he's basically saying, he's saying a civil war is going to come if we get independence, and he was right. He was right. He also believed that true independence came with Britain, so he was a loyalist, though. I think it was kind of cool, even though he was a loyalist, and I don't really fuck with loyalists. But you know what? Good on you, Joseph. Good on you. Alright, reaching the end here. Just a little bit left. But we start Common Sense by Thomas Paine. This was written in January 1776. And it was made for everyone to read. No complex language. Everyone could be able to read this. Talking about how the government should be a democratic system based on frequent elections. And they talked about how the principles of hierarchy rule and in a monarchical government was terrible and not how you should run a government. And the people in America need independence. Britain was just dragging them into conflicts with France, Spain, 7-Year War, just to give one example of many. And an island should not govern a continent. This was a huge idea for everyone. And loyalty to this one small island off the coast of Europe was a burden, not a bonus to them. So they're just getting taxed. But this inspired so many people because so many people read it. We kind of invaded Canada, which was very unsuccessful. It also resulted in the British counterattack and ransacking and burning of multiple civils, which actually gave weight to more independent movements, surprisingly. And 6 months after Common Sense, we split off. And guess what? Bada bang, Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. They would celebrated a holiday off this day. They believed that this was the opinions of mankind. It was written by Thomas Jefferson, and it declared the U.S. to be an independent nation. Signed first by Massachusetts merchant John Hancock, and it claimed the Britain to have an absolute tyranny over colonies. They gave the grievances of King George III and the inhumanities of the slave trade, as they believed all men were created equal, as everyone had natural rights. This was another idea derived from the GOAT, John Locke, as he had yet again a huge influence on the Declaration of Independence, which allowed the Americans to protest, which they were doing kind of right now in this revolution. But liberty is a universal entitlement that everyone should have. And this also led to the American exceptionalism, which is this idea that it was a special mission for the U.S. to be a model for the rest of the world, and it should be an asylum for politically outed people, and a symbol of freedom and hope for everyone. Now, this declaration throughout in the entire history, throughout today, in the modern day, in 2022, has inspired people, and it is very impactful internationally. Some countries even banned it because it brought up dangerous ideas. And you know how I said earlier, we're going to talk about some Indians. This is the only part where it talks about Indians. Tupac Amaru, not the rapper, but he was an Indian leader in Peru. Who took the name of the last Incan king. He led an uprising of against the Spanish, leaving 10,000 Spanish dead, which is a lot. But then you look at the Indian toll, and it's 100,000. Yeah. Now, the American militia, they didn't have a lot of fighting experience. I mean, they had a little bit of training, but some of them did, because a lot of Americans, you have to remember, fought in the 7-Year War. But the newer guys, the younger guys, the more fit guys, they didn't. Because was it 13 years later? To keep that in mind. But the British, they didn't really want to go into war. But war is expensive. They're already in debt. Are you kidding me? And they're surrounded by enemies, by French, who teamed up with the Americans. Then we're going to get on slaves right now. Slaves, well, initially they refused to join the army until Washington found out the British were basically just letting them in. And they're like, okay, if you join the army, you'll be set free. And they're like, okay. Everyone's like, okay, we're fine with that. Now we're on to the Battle of Saratoga with Sir William Howe, who was a British commander. who could have actually stopped the revolution if he was more aggressive. Think about that. It was the Battle of Saratoga. This is the summer of 1777, where General John Burgoyne advanced to Canada, but he wanted to link with Howe to isolate New England from the rest of the world. But he was trapped in Saratoga after Howe left for Philadelphia without him telling him, because there weren't like iMessage back then, all that stuff, which made him forced Burgoyne to surrender and greatly boost the morale of the U.S. Army. This also allowed Spain and France allied with the Americans, because they're like, you guys have a chance of winning. I know. So let's talk about the South real quick. The Southern people were treated so bad, especially by Colonel Bonaste Tarleton, I think is how you say his name, who switched many people to being patriots because he treated them so badly. It was a brutal treatment. This was in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. There were civil wars happening between patriots and loyalists. How bad of a job do you have to do to switch these people to the other side? Think about that. There's also Swamp Fox. Don't know who that is? That is Francis Marion, whose him and his men would hide in swamps, sneak attack the British, duck back in, or run away and just disappear. They had no idea what the hell was happening. Now let's get to the ending of the war. So I'm done. I'm tired out. My voice is leaving me. Lord Charles Cornwallis. He was a British commander of the South who moved his men to Yorktown, Pennsylvania, which is a peninsula. Yorktown, Virginia, which is a peninsula in the Chesapeake Bay. So Washington found himself an opportunity to rush his forces to Yorktown, and with the French controlling the water, led by Marquis de Lafayette, which controlled the mouth of the Chesapeake and stopped Cornwallis from getting reinforcements and supplies. And this is known as the Yorktown Campaign, which is a French and American project. On October 19th, 1781, Cornwallis and 8,000 British soldiers surrendered, which was a response from London. Public support evaporated. Peace negotiations started quickly after, and they soon realized that the West Indies were a lot more economically valuable. So finally, we're at the Treaty of Paris. This recognized the American independence, and America gained Florida to Canada, but they didn't actually gain Canada, just the land there. They gave Florida to Spanish, I believe, and everything east of the Mississippi River. But they also got the little thing, it's just, I don't care. The ability to fish in the Atlantic waters off Canada. This is important to New Englanders. Not really important. But British made them promise that Loyalists would receive no harm and Loyalist property would be restored, which is fair. But in this entire chapter, U.S. became the first independent country in the Western Hemisphere. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Goodbye.